The Velthari had mapped 4,000 star systems. They had catalogued neutron storms, breathing nebulae, and the skeletal ruins of 6 extinct civilizations. They had records older than most species' first fires. Their archivists slept in rotating shifts so that no moment of galactic history passed without a witness. But there was a region on every Velthari map that carried no data. Not empty. Not unexplored. Just marked. A single glyph pressed into the margin of every star chart, every navigation crystal, and every junior pilot's first training scroll. The glyph had no direct translation in modern Velthari. The closest approximation that linguists had agreed upon after 3 centuries of debate was something between "do not" and "you will not return." The region was called, in the common galactic trade tongue, the Ashfield. Nobody named it that because it looked like ash. Nobody named it that because of any poetic association with fire or ruin. It was named the Ashfield because the only species that had ever entered it, a now extinct race of deep space nomads called the Sorin, had come back in ships that smelled like burning. Every one of them. Every single ship, every single survivor carrying that same smell. Like something enormous had been on fire nearby and had since gone out. The Sorin never explained what they saw. They stopped traveling entirely. Within 2 generations they stopped speaking. Within 4 they were gone. That was 1100 years ago. Senior navigator Thessaly Vorn had been staring at the Ashfield boundary on her console for 40 minutes when her junior officer, Peck, finally spoke. "You are doing the thing again," Peck said. Peck was young, barely past first molt, and had the particular boldness of someone who had not yet learned which silences were sacred. "What thing?" Thessaly said. "Not a question. The staring thing. When you look at the border and your secondary eyes go flat." Peck tilted his head, 3 degrees left, the Velthari gesture for careful concern. "It is not good for your ridge membrane." "My ridge membrane is fine. It is doing the dry curl." Thessaly pulled her gaze from the screen. "We have a problem, Peck. We have many problems. The cooling relay on deck 4 is not the relay." She pulled up the dispatch on the secondary screen. The light from it turned everything on the bridge a pale, uncomfortable blue. "The conclave received a signal 3 days ago. Originating point." She let him read it. Peck's secondary eyes went flat too. "That is inside the Ashfield," he said. 47 light minutes inside the Ashfield. Silence. "What kind of signal?" Peck asked. "That is the part that the conclave cannot agree on." Thessaly folded her navigational membranes against her arms, a gesture she had learned from her own senior navigator years ago, a way of making yourself smaller when the universe felt too large. "It is not distress. It is not military. It is not a standard frequency used by any registered species in the known galaxy." "Then what is it?" She looked back at the blue screen. "It sounds," she said slowly, "like music." The conclave of assembled species met in emergency session on the neutral station of Orvithdal, a rotating habitat that smelled perpetually of recycled atmosphere and old political tension. 41 species. 41 delegations. 41 different ways of being afraid. The Karathi, tall, phosphorescent, and incapable of lying due to a bioluminescent nervous system that literally lit up under deception, sat in the far left row with their light panels deliberately dimmed. Thessaly noted this. When the Karathi dimmed themselves voluntarily, it meant they already knew something they did not want to say in public. The Mun said nothing throughout the entire opening session. They communicated through subsonic pulses that made Thessaly's chest cavity hum uncomfortably. She didn't need a translator. The sensation meant dread. Ambassador Velik of the Preethian sovereignty stood at the central podium, a 7-limbed being whose formal robes were the color of deep space vacuum, and began the session with words that Thessaly had never expected to hear in her lifetime. "We must discuss the humans." There was a particular quality to the silence that followed. It was not the silence of a room with nothing to say. It was the silence of 41 species that had been carefully, collectively, and generationally trained to say nothing about one specific subject, and were now being asked to stop. Thessaly had grown up knowing about humans the same way she had grown up knowing about Ashfield. This is a fact that requires no examination. It served as a boundary that required no justification. You did not discuss humans in professional settings. You did not enter human-registered space. You did not attempt contact. The act was not law. There was no conclave statute forbidding it. There was no treaty of exclusion. It was simply what was done. It was simply what had always been done. And yet, Thessaly looked at the blue coordinates on her personal tablet. 47 light minutes inside the Ashfield. A signal like music. She thought about the Sorin ships. The smell of burning. She thought about the fact that her civilization had been avoiding a region of space for over 1,000 years, and that not one of them in all that time had thought to ask the obvious question. What, Thessaly thought, are we actually afraid of? The official Velthary archives on the subject of humans were exactly 3 pages long. Thessaly had read the books as a student. She remembered thinking they were oddly thin for a subject that seemed to occupy so much of galactic culture's negative space, that vast shape of a thing you know only by what surrounds it, never by looking at it directly. The 3 pages said, humans were carbon-based bipeds. They had originated on a single world in the Ashfield's interior cluster. They had achieved faster-than-light travel approximately 2,000 standard years ago, earlier than most species, later than some. They had contacted 3 neighboring civilizations in rapid succession. None of those 3 civilizations existed anymore. The archives did not elaborate on this point. That was where the 3 pages ended. Thessaly knew, the way all Velthary knew, that there were unofficial records, passed through family lines, whispered in the particular register that Velthary used for things that were true but not safe to say loudly. Her grandmother had told her one such record the night before Thessaly left for her first navigator posting. They had been sitting in the membrane garden, the soft organic room at the center of every Velthary home where the walls breathed gently and the light was the color of early morning. I will tell you one true thing about humans, her grandmother had said, that is not in any archive. Thessaly had waited. My grandmother's grandmother was on a Velthary science vessel that came within long-range sensor distance of the Ashfield boundary. This was before the current exclusion culture was fully established. There was still some academic debate about whether avoidance was necessary. Her grandmother's secondary eyes had gone to that flat, inward look. The sensors picked up activity inside the border. Not military. Not hostile. Just living. A populated system. Cities on multiple worlds. Ships moving between them. What happened? Thessaly had asked. Nothing, her grandmother said. That is the part nobody talks about. Nothing happened. The humans did not attack. They did not threaten. They did not even respond to the sensor sweep, either because they didn't notice or because they chose not to. She had folded her membranes inward. The captain of that vessel ordered an immediate withdrawal anyway. Filed a report recommending permanent exclusion protocols. The report was accepted without debate. Why? Thessaly had asked. If nothing happened. Because of what the long-range visual sensors showed, her grandmother said. Before they withdrew. What did they show? Her grandmother was quiet for a long time. Humans, she said finally, do not build the way other species build. Every species we have ever encountered, when they build cities, when they build ships, when they build anything, they build away from their scars. They put the difficult things behind them. The ruins, the damage, the places where something went wrong, they leave those behind and build forward. Thessaly waited. Humans build with their scars, her grandmother said. The visual sensors showed cities that incorporated their ruins. Ships that carried their damage as part of their design. A species that had experienced what looked like catastrophic conflict across multiple worlds, and instead of leaving it behind, they had absorbed it. Built on top of it. Made it structural. She had touched Thessaly's face gently. The captain looked at that and felt something she could not name. She wrote in her private log, not the official report, the private one, the one that passed down through our family, that looking at those images felt like looking at something that had survived something she could not imagine surviving. Her grandmother's voice had been hushed. And the most frightening part was not that they had survived it. The most frightening part was that they seemed entirely fine. Thessaly thought about that story during the transport to Orvith Dahl. She thought about the signal. She thought about the music. The unofficial briefing, the one that happened in a small room off the main conclave floor, attended by 11 senior representatives rather than 41, was chaired by Karathi Ambassador Sen, whose light panels remained dimmed throughout. What we are about to share does not leave this room in an official capacity, Sen began. Understood, said the representatives. 3 days ago, the signal from inside the Ashfield was received. It was broadcast on a frequency that we have since identified as one used by humans for a pause, recreational transmission. What some species call a broadcast for entertainment. Thessaly looked up. You are saying, said the Mun representative, the subsonic pulse of the words vibrating through everyone's chests, that the signal was not addressed to us. Correct, said Sen. It was not a message. It was not a warning. It was not a greeting. It was humans broadcasting music for themselves. The signal leaked outside their territorial boundary due to what appears to be equipment operating at higher than standard power output. Silence. They did not know we could hear it, Thessaly said. We do not believe so, no. She sat with that for a moment. The galaxy's most feared territorial boundary. 1,000 years of careful avoidance. The extinction of the Soren is hanging over every star chart. And the source of the signal was a radio tower pointed in the wrong direction. What was the music? She asked. Sen's light panels flickered, the Karathi equivalent of a complicated expression. We have had it analyzed, Sen said. It is a human compositional form. The analysis suggests it is what their cultural records, which we have gathered carefully from signal debris over centuries, describe as a lament. Another flicker. It appears to be a song about missing someone who is gone. Thessaly thought about the Soren. She thought about her grandmother's voice. She thought about scars built into architecture. I want to go in, she said. Every head in the room turned toward her. Not militarily. Not officially. I want to go in as an observer. Long range. Silent approach. She kept her voice level. We have been afraid of something for 1,100 years, and not one of us has verified whether the thing we are afraid of is the thing that is actually there. The room was hushed. The Soren, someone began. Went in 1,100 years ago, Thessaly said. We know nothing about what they encountered. We know they came back changed. We know they became extinct. We do not know causality. We do not know if those facts are connected. She paused. We have been treating correlation as law. For 1,000 years. Sen's light panels did something. Thessaly had never seen a Karathi do it in a professional setting. They brightened. The ship was called the Vethani Saro, a name Thessaly had not chosen and would not have chosen, but which she decided, somewhere over the long transit toward the Ashfield boundary, was perhaps appropriate. It was a small vessel. Research class. Equipped with the finest long-range sensory arrays available to Velthari science, and also, because the conclave was composed of beings who prepared for multiple outcomes, a drive system capable of emergency translation speeds that would take them 17 light-years from their current position in approximately 4 minutes. In other words, exceptional eyes and swift legs. The crew was 5. Thessaly. Peck, who had refused to be left behind, wore an expression of such calm determination that arguing felt unkind. A Karathi sensor specialist named Aval, whose light panels broadcast steady, professional competence like a lighthouse. A Mun structural analyst named Deep Tone Rising Falling, who went by Ren in the trade tongue and communicated primarily through a small translation device worn at the throat. And a being that Thessaly had not expected the conclave to include, a small, elderly, deeply quiet individual named Sas, who represented what remained of Soren descendant communities. There were very few Soren descendants left. The extinction had been cultural first, then demographic, a people who had stopped wanting to continue. Sas was 4 generations removed from the last Soren who had entered the Ashfield and returned. Sas had their grandmother's journals. Sas had not read them until the conclave asked. They were sealed, Sas told Thessaly on the second day of transit, in the small meal room at the center of the ship. My grandmother's grandmother left instructions. She said the journals were not for her descendants to read until someone came asking the right question. What was the right question? Thessaly asked. Sas looked at her with eyes that were ancient and very dark. She wrote it on the outside of the seal, Sas said. She wrote, open when someone finally wants to know the truth instead of the warning. A pause. You are the first in 4 generations of my family to come asking. So I opened them. What do they say? Sas was quiet for a moment, the particular quiet of someone who is still processing something large. She says, Sas began, that the Soren were not attacked. Thessaly waited. She says the Soren entered human space because they were resource desperate. Their nomadic routes had collapsed. They needed to negotiate passage through the inner cluster. There was a region with rare atmospheric compounds critical to Soren biology. They entered the Ashfield because they had no other option. And the humans? The humans received them. Sas folded small hands on the table. Not with hostility. The accounts describe it as confusing at first. The humans did not behave the way any species the Soren had previously encountered did. They were not formal. They did not follow standard diplomatic protocols. They asked questions that seemed irrelevant, personal questions, curiosity questions. They offered food. Thessaly frowned. That does not sound like the origin of a millennium of galactic terror. No, Sas agreed. It does not. Another pause. The terror came later. The terror came from what the Soren learned while they were there. While they were being fed and asked personal questions and shown human cities. Sas looked at the table. My grandmother's grandmother writes that the Soren had not understood before that visit what humans had survived. What had they survived? Sauce looked up. Everything, Sauce said simply. The journals describe it. Not invasion. Humans had no external enemy that threatened extinction. The destruction was internal. Humans nearly destroyed themselves. Multiple times. With weapons, with environmental collapse, with systems of social organization that generated suffering on a scale that should have been. Sauce paused, searching for words. The Soren were a resilient species. Nomadic. Tough. And the Soren looked at the history of what humans had lived through and felt something they could not metabolize. What? Thessaly asked quietly. Vertigo, Sauce said. My grandmother's grandmother writes that word. Vertigo. Like looking down from a tremendous height. They saw a species that had looked directly into the worst of themselves, repeatedly, and had not broken. Had not stopped. Had kept going. Had built on it, incorporated it, and made it part of their foundation. Sauce touched the journal gently. And the Soren came home and could not stop thinking about it. They could not stop measuring themselves against it. Could not stop asking, if something that terrible came for us, would we do the same? And they concluded. Sauce stopped. Thessaly said nothing. They concluded they would not, Sauce said. And that knowledge broke something in them. Not the humans. The humans never did anything to the Soren except answer their questions honestly. The meal room hummed with the sound of the drive. Thessaly thought about 3 pages in an archive. She pondered over the details often overlooked. The ships smelled like burning, she said. When they came back. Human cooking, Sauce said. My grandmother's grandmother writes that human hospitality involves fire. They were fed warm food. The smell was, Sauce made a small sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a cry. The smell was dinner. The Vedhani Sorrow reached the Ashfield boundary at 0600 ship standard. Thessaly had expected to feel something. She was not sure what, a change in the quality of space, some physical register of crossing a line that 1100 years of galactic culture had treated as the edge of the known world. There was nothing. The stars were the same. The dark between them was the same. The sensors reported nominal conditions across every measurable dimension. No territorial markers, Aval reported, light panels steady. No automated warning systems. No weapons platforms. No surveillance infrastructure of any kind. Nothing? Peck said. Nothing at all. Aval ran the sweep again. Long range shows 3 inhabited systems within sensor range. Population signatures, large but not militarized. I'm reading energy outputs consistent with civilian infrastructure. Power generation, agriculture, transport. Wren's translation device said, they have not fortified their border. No, Thessaly said. They do not know we come. They may, Thessaly said carefully. We don't know what they know. She was looking at the sensor display. The 3 systems. The calm civilian energy readings. The absolute absence of anything that looked like a warning or a weapon. She thought about what it meant, what it architecturally meant, to not fortify a border. You either did not know that threats existed, did not fear them, or had considered the possibility and made a deliberate decision that walls were not your answer. All 3 options were, in their own way, extraordinary. Take us in, she said. Slow. Observation profile. No active signal. They spent 6 days inside the Ashfield before anything happened. 6 days of observation. Aval is running silent sensor sweeps. Wren is cataloging the structural signatures of human architecture and quietly confirming what Thessaly's grandmother had described. The ruins were incorporated. The damage was made structural. Cities that had layers to them, historical trauma visible in their foundations like rings in old wood. Peck spent most of those 6 days building vocabulary lists. He had found signal debris from human broadcasts, centuries of it floating in the electromagnetic record of space, and was running translation algorithms with an intensity that suggested he had found a personal mission. Sauce sat with the journals. On the 4th day, Peck looked up from his console with an expression that Thessaly had not seen on him before. Navigator, he said. I think I have been misunderstanding something. What? He turned the screen toward her. Centuries of signal debris. A translation map spreading across it like a root system. I have been trying to understand what humans are afraid of, Peck said. I thought if I understood their fear, what scares them, what makes them stop, I would understand the boundary. Why nothing enters their space. Why the galaxy maintains the distance. And? Peck looked at the screen. I cannot find it, he said. I have looked through 200 years of broadcast signals. Stories, news, personal communication, and art. I can find grief. I can find anger. I can find something I believe is loneliness, though the concept maps strangely to our emotional vocabulary. He paused. But I cannot find stopping. I cannot find the thing they encounter and then step back from permanently. He looked at Thessaly. Every terrible thing they show in their stories, they go back. They try again. They grieve and then they try again. He said it like it confused him. Even in their fictional narratives, their made-up stories, the pattern is the same. The protagonist fails. Then gets up. Thessaly looked at the translation map. That is not frightening, Rin said. The translation device gave the words a flat effect, but Thessaly had learned in 4 days to hear the mun subsonic behind them. The vibration in her chest said something more complex than the words. It said something closer to and yet. No, Thessaly said. It is not frightening. She thought about the galaxy. About 41 species maintained distance from a region of space containing a civilization that cooked food over fire, sent music into the dark, and built their grief into their foundations. She thought about the Soren. Would we do the same? They had asked themselves. And if not, what does that mean? She was beginning to understand that the terror of human space had never been about what humans would do to the galaxy. It had always been about what the galaxy feared they would feel, when they looked at what humans were and then looked at themselves. On the 6th day, a human ship appeared on the sensors. It was not a warship. Thessaly had run the configuration analysis 3 times before she accepted this. It was approximately the size of the Vethani Sorrow. It had the slightly asymmetric, improvised-looking design signature that Ren had been cataloging in human architecture, functional, but with the particular aesthetic of something that had been built, and then modified again, each iteration of repair and adaptation leaving its mark on the whole. It had no weapons that the sensors could identify. It was moving toward them at a relaxed, unhurried speed that suggested an awareness of their presence but no urgency about it. They have seen us, Avel said. Yes. They are not altering course. No. They are, Avel paused. Navigator. They are broadcasting. Thessaly straightened. What frequency? It is the same as the original signal, the recreational broadcast frequency. Avel's light panels performed a complex function. They are playing music. At us. Peck made a sound. Is it the same composition? Thessaly asked. No, Peck said because he had been listening. He had his translation interface running. It is different. It is, he stopped. I do not have the vocabulary for this in Velthary. In human signal debris I have this as a greeting song? A song that is played when meeting someone for the first time. There is a cultural tradition in some human communities of welcoming strangers with music. The human ship continued its slow, unhurried approach. Thessaly looked at it on the screen. The improvised hull. The visible repairs. The absolutely calm trajectory. They are not afraid of us, she thought. And then, immediately after, of course they are not afraid of us. They are not afraid of much. We have always known this. We called it terror and we ran from it. But running from something and being terrified of it are not the same as understanding it. Can we respond? She asked Peck. Ah yes. I have enough vocabulary. The translation would be imperfect but functional. Then respond. Peck turned back to his console. His hands were very still, the Velthary sign of concentrated calm. He sent a signal. What happened next was not what Thessaly had expected, though afterward she was not sure what she had expected. The music stopped. There was a pause, the length of a few breaths. Then a voice came through the speaker. A human voice. Single. Unmodulated by any device. Direct, organic, slightly rough at the edges in the way that Thessaly had come to associate from signal debris, with human voices in moments of genuine feeling. Peck was already translating, the words coming a few seconds behind in Velthary, displayed on his screen for Thessaly to read. The human said imperfectly, through Peck's best approximation. Hi. We saw your ship a couple of days ago. We figured you'd come closer when you were ready. Are you hungry? The bridge of the Vethani Sorrow was completely silent. Ren's translation device for once said nothing. Avel's light panels went to a color Thessaly had not seen before, a pale, uncertain flickering that she would later learn was the Karathi physiological response to something that restructured your expectations very quickly. Peck turned around slowly and looked at Thessaly. Thessaly looked at the screen. At the imperfect translation. In those 3 sentences, I had come across 1100 years of galactic avoidance, like light through a window that nobody had thought to open. She thought about the Soren arriving desperate and resource-depleted and being offered food. She thought about her grandmother's grandmother's captain, pulling away from long-range sensors and filing a report about scars built into architecture, and writing in her private log about a species that had survived what she could not imagine surviving and seemed entirely fine. She thought about 41 delegations in a rotating station that smelled of old political tension, maintaining a silence about humans the way you maintain a silence around a wound you have decided not to examine. She looked at Peck. "Tell them," she said slowly, "that we would appreciate that." The human ship was called the Marin Tide. The human who had spoken was its captain, a woman named Elliot Voss, who was approximately 4 decades into a human lifespan, which Thessaly understood to be somewhere in its middle range. She was compact, brown-skinned, with close-cut gray at her temples and the particular quality of stillness in her movement that Thessaly associated, from Peck's signal debris research, with humans who had spent a long time in space. She came alone to the docking interface. No security. No diplomatic delegation. She brought a container of hot food, something grain-based with a smell that was deeply, unexpectedly comforting, and she sat down across from Thessaly in the small neutral room they had designated for the meeting, and she looked at Thessaly with an expression that Peck, consulting his vocabulary matrix, described in an urgent whisper as curious and gentle. "Your translator is good," Elliot Voss said, looking at Peck. "Not perfect but satisfactory. You've been studying our signals?" "For 4 days," Peck said. "More intensively. But our civilization has been collecting signal debris for centuries," Elliot said. "Not surprised. Not offended. We know." She pushed the food container toward the center of the table. "How long have you been avoiding us?" Pause. "The current exclusion culture," Thessaly said carefully, "has been in practice for approximately 1100 years. Elliot nodded slowly as though this confirmed something she had suspected. "Do you know why?" she asked. "We are learning," Thessaly said. "We thought we knew. The reasons we were given were incomplete." Elliot looked at the table for a moment. There was something in her expression that Peck would later describe, after extensive consultation with his translation matrix, as sad but not surprised. The specific sadness of someone who has encountered an expected thing and not yet decided whether to be tired of it or patient with it. "The Soren," Elliot said. "You know of them?" "We have records." She looked up. "They came. We didn't understand them very well. We weren't sure what they needed. We tried to be welcoming. We were probably overwhelming." She said those words plainly, without defensiveness. "Humans can be overwhelming. We know the truth about ourselves." She paused. "They left. They seemed troubled. We monitored the signal from their territory for a while, worried we'd done something wrong. And then the signal stopped." "They ceased as a species," Thessaly said. Elliot was quiet. "Not because of anything we did," Thessaly said. "Or not directly. The current understanding is that the encounter affected them, internally. An existential reckoning that they were unable to metabolize." Elliot absorbed this. Her expression moved through several things. Thessaly could not entirely read. "And the rest of the galaxy decided," Elliot said finally, "that the safe interpretation of that was, stay away from the people who had the meal?" "The safe interpretation," Thessaly said carefully, "was complex. But yes, broadly." Elliot looked at the food container on the table. Something crossed her face that was neither a smile nor grief. It occupied the precise space between them. "And you came anyway," she said. "We came to understand," Thessaly said. "There is a difference." Elliot looked at her then, directly as Thessaly had noticed humans did, without the careful deflection angles that most species used in first contact situations. Direct and unhurried, as though looking at someone required no apology. "What do you want to understand?" Elliot asked. Thessaly considered the question. She thought about everything she had carried into this room, 1100 years of galactic avoidance, 3 pages in an archive, her grandmother's voice in a membrane garden, the Soren journals, the vertigo, the architecture of incorporated scars, the music broadcast into the dark without knowledge of who might hear it. "I want to understand," Thessaly said slowly, "how you are fine." Elliot's expression shifted again. That not quite smile. Something that lived in the deep registers of it that Peck's translation matrix couldn't reach yet. "Who told you we're fine?" she said. They talked for 9 hours. Elliot Voss was not a diplomat. She told Thessaly this early without apology. She was a freight captain. She moved materials between intercluster systems. She had spent 30 years in space and had opinions about engine calibration and cargo manifests and the particular social dynamics of small ships on long routes, and she said this plainly, Not qualified to speak on behalf of humanity. Then why did you approach us? Thessaly asked. Because you were there, Elliot said. And you seemed like you'd been working up to something for a while. Pause. And because someone should. This was, Thessaly thought, a very human answer. What emerged over 9 hours was not a diplomatic framework. It was not a treaty or a formal exchange. It was closer to what Peck's translation matrix identified as a conversation between people who have different pieces of the same large thing and are trying carefully to see if they fit together. The galaxy thinks you are terrifying, Thessaly said at some point in the middle hours. Elliot was quiet for a moment. Because of what we survived. Because of how you survived it. Because you continued. Because you incorporated it and built on it and did not stop. Elliot leaned her arms on the table. She had a quality of presence that Thessaly was still trying to map. Not aggressive, not performatively calm, but something that occupied its space completely without apology or excess. Can I ask you something? Elliot said. Yes. Does your species have the concept of the thing you do when you can't fix something? When something is broken and it's not going to unbreak, and you have to decide what to do next? Thessaly considered. Grief, she said. And then, adaptation. Right. Elliot nodded. For us, the way we understand it, the way our psychologists and historians have spent a lot of time writing about, there was a period in our development, a long period, when we were very bad at that. When we encountered something broken, we either denied it or we were destroyed by it. Pause. A lot of us were destroyed by it. Internally. The history is not. It's not a success story with footnotes. There are very deep trenches in it. The Soren saw those trenches, Thessaly said. And we're still in some of them, Elliot said. That's the part your archives probably don't have. We are not fine. I said that earlier and I meant it. We are not fine. We are continuing. Which is a different thing. She looked people who live nearby bring their kids to see them and sit with them in the early hours when the light is special. Me. The room was hushed. The galaxy looked at that choosing, Thessaly said slowly, and felt, measured against it. Maybe, Elliot said. I can't speak for the galaxy. The Soren felt measured against it, Thessaly said. They asked themselves if they would do the same. They concluded they would not. And it unmade them. Elliot absorbed the scene for a long moment. That is a terrible thing, she said. Quietly. Without drama. The way you say something is simple and directly true. They didn't need to answer that question. Nobody, she stopped. Started again. The question of what you would do in the worst possible case is not meant to be answered in advance. It's only meant to be answered when you're in it. Pause. We didn't know they were asking it. We would have told them not to. Sauce, who had been sitting quietly at the edge of the room for the entire 9 hours, made a small sound. Everyone looked at them. Sauce cautiously opened the journal. The journal entry that Sauce read aloud was not the most dramatic passage. It was not the first entry nor the last. It was written, according to the date markings, on the 3rd day of the Soren visit to human space, the day before they left. The Soren who had written it had been a navigator. Her name was Avel Sauce, Sauce's grandmother's grandmother's grandmother, and she had written in the close, precise notation style of Soren navigators, factual, detailed, with emotional content recorded the way you record a sensor reading. Observable. Measurable. Present. Sauce read it in the original Soren and Peck translated as they went, his voice careful and quiet. 3rd day. The humans have shown us their memorial sites. This was our request. We asked to understand what they had lost. We expected ruins. Monuments. The kind of preserved distance that most species maintain between themselves and their painful history. What they showed us was different. The sites are not distant. They are inhabited. There are people who live adjacent to them, who bring their children to see them, and who sit with them in the early hours when the light is of a particular quality. There is a word in the human language for this practice. A practice of sitting with grief not to resolve it but to remain in relationship with it. I do not have a direct Soren equivalent. I have been trying to understand why this situation disturbs me so profoundly. It is this: I had always understood survival as a matter of moving forward. Away from the damage. Fast enough that the worst things cannot catch you. We are nomads. This is what we do. We do not stay. The humans stay. They stay with the worst things they have known, and they do not let those things become abstract or historical. They keep them present. They keep them alive, in some sense that I am struggling to articulate, not as wounds that are still bleeding, but as knowledge that is still teaching. I do not know if our people can do this. I discover that I cannot stop asking. I find the question is changing the shape of something inside me, and I am afraid that when I return home, I will see my people through what I have learned here, and I will keep asking, are we moving so fast because we are living, or because we are afraid of the answer that waits when we stop? I do not know. I think the humans would tell me that not knowing is the beginning, not the end. I think I am not ready for that. Asterisk. The room held the words for a long time. Elliot had her eyes on the table. When she looked up, the expression on her face was one that Thessaly had not seen before, not in signal debris, not in Peck's vocabulary matrix. It was something that required the full-dimensional reality of a face to transmit. Something that moved through the deep registers below language. She understood us, Elliot said. Very quietly. Yes, Sauce said. She understood us, and it was too much. It was too much alone, Sauce said. They paused. Without anyone to sit with it alongside. Elliot looked at Sauce. At the journal. Elliot gazed at the small, ancient, meticulous handwriting that had endured over a millennium to grace this room. We didn't know they were alone with it, Elliot said. No. You could not have known. Sauce closed the journal with enormous care. But I think my grandmother's grandmother would have wanted you to know. Eventually. I think that is why the seal said, open when someone finally wants to know the truth instead of the warning. Thessaly watched Elliot process this. Watched the choosing that Elliot had described, the thing that happened deliberately, specifically, every time. She could see the mechanism now that she knew how to look for it. It was not invisible. It was not simple. It was quiet, and it was continuous, and it was the most ordinary, extraordinary thing she had ever witnessed. What do we do with this? Elliot asked. She was asking all of them. Thessaly thought about 41 species in a rotating station. The silence around a name. The 3-page archive. The glyph meant do not and you will not return. We go back, Thessaly said. And we tell them what the Soren actually found. The Vethani Sorrow crossed back out of the Ashfield 17 days after it had entered. The conclave was already assembled at Orvith Dal. Word had spread, not of what Thessaly had found, but simply that she had gone in and had come back out, and that the ship was intact, and that there was no smell of burning. The formal session was standing room across every frequency and satellite relay in the connected galactic network. 41 species. And behind them, countless billions are listening to whatever translation delay their distance imposes. Thessaly stood at the central podium. She had prepared words. She had composed them over 3 days of transit, with Peck's help, and they were precise and carefully structured and addressed every diplomatic and historical dimension of what she had found. She set them aside. She stood at the podium and she spoke plainly the way that Elliot Voss had spoken. Without apology or excess. I entered Ashfield 17 days ago, she said. I met humans. I ate their food. I sat with them for 9 hours. I listened to them talk about themselves. The network was hushed. They are not what the silence said they were. The silence said they were a power. A threat. A territory whose boundary was best respected because of what lay beyond it. The silence implied that the worst outcome of contact was what they might do to us. She looked out at the 41 delegations. The Soren were not destroyed by humans. They were not attacked, threatened, or damaged. They were welcomed. They were fed. They were treated with the kind of ordinary, unremarkable generosity that humans apparently extend to strangers as a matter of cultural reflex. She paused. The Soren were unmade by what they learned about themselves in the presence of humans. They asked themselves a question they were not ready to answer, and they could not unask it. Silence. I want to be careful here, Thessaly said. The wrong interpretation of what I am about to say would be that humans are superior. That they have something we lack. The correct response to this information is admiration, shame, or a new kind of fear dressed up as respect. She let that land. That interpretation would be wrong. And it would repeat the error the Soren made. She looked at the Karathi delegation. At Sen the light panels were fully bright. Humans nearly destroyed themselves, she said. Multiple times. They are not fine. They are continuing, which is different. They have trenches in their history that they sit with rather than run from, not because they are stronger than us, but because they learned through terrible experience that running does not work. Pause. They learned it the hard way. They are still learning it. They would be the first to tell you this. She thought about Elliot Voss saying, nobody is meant to answer that question in advance. The Soren asked, would we do the same? And answered, no. And we were unmade by that answer. Thessaly's voice was steady. I am asking something different. I am asking, what would it mean, for all of us together, to learn the thing that the Soren learned alone? The network held the question. Because the humans are not the most frightening thing in the ash field, Thessaly said. She let the silence build. The most frightening thing in the ash field is a question. Unlike territories, one cannot simply draw a line around a question and call it safety. Sas spoke briefly after Thessaly. They read one passage from the journal, the final line of the entry from the third day. Peck translated. I think the humans would tell me that not knowing is the beginning, not the end. The debate that followed lasted 11 standard months. Not all species agreed. Several maintained their exclusion protocols. One group, the Mun, who used complicated subsonic communication, stepped back for a while to talk with their cultural leaders, who took a long time to make decisions, making the political urgency seem less important. But a beginning was made. A channel was opened. Not a full diplomatic corridor, something smaller. A frequency. A signal was sent on the recreational broadcast band that humans used for music, carrying a simple message that Peck had composed over many careful hours. It said, roughly, imperfectly, in the human trade tongue. We have been outside your door for a long time. We think we are ready to knock. The response came in 4 hours. Music first. Then a voice, not Elliot Voss but someone new, someone Thessaly had never met, which felt right, which felt like the thing itself rather than just a continuation of a single thread. The voice said, come in. We made food. Thessaly sat in the bridge of the Vethani Sorrow and listened to the translation come through in Peck's careful voice, and she thought about the Soren navigator who had written in close, precise notation about sitting with grief not to resolve it but to remain in relationship with it, and about her grandmother in a membrane garden, and about a captain who had pulled away from long-range sensors and filed a report that left everything important out, and about the glyph in the margin of every star chart that meant something between do not and you will not return. She thought about how the most dangerous territory in the known galaxy had turned out to be, on the inside, hushed. Very ordinary. Full of people who cooked food over fire and sent music into the dark and built their grief into their foundations, not because they were extraordinary but because they had learned, the hard way, that the alternative was to be unmade by it. She thought about Elliot Voss's face when Sas read from the journal. She thought about what it meant to understand something, not to admire it, not to fear it, not to measure yourself against it, but simply to understand it. To let it be what it was. To sit with it. She thought, this is the beginning. And then she saw what the Soren navigator had written in her journal on the third day of the visit, 1,100 years ago, in the close and careful handwriting of someone recording an observable fact. I think I am not ready for that. And then she thought about what came after. She reached forward and set the course.